Here's the plat de résistance for a fancy dinner. Tenderloin of beef, roasted rare and lovely. Truffled brown Madeira sauce, the freshest of vegetables. Here's how to do a bang-up main course for a sit-down dinner. Today, on the French Chef.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. Certainly, a tenderloin of beef is one of the most delicious of meats, and it's the most expensive, but it's also the most easy to cook because it always takes the same time, 35 to 45 minutes. So that if you're the cook and butler for a dinner party, you can get it all ready for the oven ahead of time, and then you can put it in and time it so that it comes out just before you're ready to serve the main course, and then it's resting from its roasting so that you can carve it easily. And that's all there is to it. And although it's a very expensive cut, if you're going to do all of your own work and you can afford it, it's certainly well worth trying to have. And of course, if you're going to spend all that money for a tenderloin, you've got to spend a lot of money also for the greatest red wines that you can think of. And I think that for a tenderloin of beef, this is going to be roasted. I like a very fine red Bordeaux wine, one of the best Chateau bottlings. That's the trouble. If you're going to spend money for beef, you've got to spend money for wine too. If you are living in the California wine country, you could look for a marvelous Cabernet Sauvignon. And also, if you haven't gone in for wines very much, it's one of the pleasantest kind of hobbies you can have, because the only way you can learn about wines is on-the-job learning. In other words, you've got to drink them. And the more you drink wines and talk about them and talk to your friends and read good books, the more you'll learn about it. And then you want to find a very good wine merchant. And when you go and pick out your red Bordeaux wine, supposing you pick it out and you trot home with it under your shoulder, bouncing it around like that, and then you sit down to dinner and open it up and pour out a glass and take a drink, it's no good. Why? It's because a red wine, particularly a fine red Bordeaux wine, needs a rest. Just moving at all is a shock to it, so that you really have to sit it and let it lie down on its side and let it rest for several days. I think 3 or 4 weeks is better. And you don't have to have a wine cellar. It's wonderful if you do have one. But what wine's like is an even temperature, ideally 50 to 55 degrees, but even if it's 65, that's all right. The main thing, it doesn't like a quick change of temperature, like say it goes down to 32 degrees and then comes up to 75 like a New England fall. That's very bad for wine. What it wants is an even temperature. And then after you have let it lay and compose itself, say it's lying on its side, and you just can keep it in a wine case, and you bring it very carefully up to your dining room. Some people like very carefully then to let it stand for several hours up on its upright to let the sediment sink down to the bottom. Other people like to keep it lay it very carefully in a wine basket, and then the sediment stays just about down in the bottom of the bottle. And also it's very important what temperature you serve the wine at. A red Bordeaux wine should be served at around 65 degrees, which used to be considered room temperature. Of course, room temperatures now are warmer than that, so you should keep it. If it's been in a cold place, put it somewhere where the temperature is around 65 and let it sit for several hours. And you never want to heat it, but you do want it to come up to that temperature so that it will release all the lovely flavor it has and the aroma. And also, a red Bordeaux needs to be open 2 to 4 hours before you serve it. So after it is come up to 65, or while it's doing it, carefully take the cork out, and then the wine breathes. Very often you will find that, that the wine, if you haven't allowed it to breathe, you think, oh, this isn't very good. And then about the last few little sips you have in your glass, suddenly you realize it was a wonderful wine, but that was because it had sat long enough and aerated itself. And this is a wine basket, which is very pleasant to have for a red Bordeaux. White wines don't sit in baskets at all because they don't have a sediment. But now the second thing after you've chosen your wine is, of course, the menu. And we're going to have, as a first course, we have stuffed artichoke hearts with mushrooms and sauce béarnaise, meaning that with our beef we can't have any eggs, mushrooms, or artichokes. And so what to serve with the beef? Well, it's a good idea to have books and pictures so that when you have this problem, you can look up and get some ideas. Now here's a tenderloin of beef that's surrounded with some little custards and some braised lettuces and some potatoes. And this is a garniture called moderne. And here is another one. As a matter of fact, that's the same one. But the lettuce here doesn't look as though they had really braised it. The most beautiful picture, I think, is the one that comes in the Time Life book of classic cuisine. And this one is garnished with stuffed mushrooms, tomatoes, lettuce, and there's a beautiful piece of roast beef with a truffle sauce. So get some ideas of how the beef should look and what you should garnish it with. And there are classic garnitures which you can find in escoffier. There are things that are called rôti, filet de bœuf, petit duc, or Saint-Germain, or frascati. And each one of the classical garnitures has a name, and you can call it by that if you use just what they say. Otherwise, you don't have to give it a classic name. But we're not going to do vegetables. I'm going to concentrate on the beef itself, because as it's so expensive, I think it's a good thing to know as much as you can about the tenderloin, so that when you buy your own, you're going to get the very best. It's too bad we don't have several hours together. Now, we have here a whole tenderloin of beef. And as you remember, the tenderloin comes from the small of your back. If you were a beef, here's your last rib, your 13th rib, and there's your hip. And the big end of the tenderloin fits into the hip. I'm not as big as a beef. And the tiny end hits the 13th rib. And so that is the whole tenderloin. And this one, it's about 23 inches long and untrimmed. It still has all its fat on. It weighs 8 to 9 pounds usually. And the big end down here is called the butt. And the little end is called the tail. And not all markets carry a whole tenderloin. This butt end, which is the sirloin steak or hip section, very often doesn't appear, so that they just have the tenderloin from sort of 2/3 of the way down to the tail, and this is called the short loin tenderloin. Very often you even ask them and they don't even know, unfortunately. But what you have to do with the tenderloin is to take all of the fat off, if you're going to trim it yourself, and then peel it. But before we do that, I'm going to show you one way that you can buy a tenderloin is vacuum wrapped in a very heavy foil. And this is put out. You can get your market to order one of these, and they're of extremely good quality. And I think they're probably cheaper too because they're put out by the manufacturers. Now I'm going to show you a trimmed tenderloin and an untrimmed one so that you get the difference. See, here's the, lift that up a little bit. Now see, this one has been trimmed. And what you do when you trim it, you pull the fat off. And then, right underneath all of the fat on one side, there is a kind of a skin which you take off in strips with a sharp little knife. I've done most of this. I just wanted you to see what happened. On the other side, this is the side that was next to the backbone. There's some fat most of which you leave on. You take some of it off. And you also have a side, what's called a side strap. I'm going to peel this off a little way so that you see what it is. But this strap or chain of meat goes all the way up to the butt end. And I usually leave this on. So when you're taking the fat off, be very careful about that side where this fat is. And on this side, there's sometimes a bit of meat, but you can leave that on, take the extra fat off. And this has about, this is all the fat that came off. It's about 3 pounds of fat. Untrimmed, the tenderloin weighs about 8 to 9 pounds, and trimmed, it weighs about 5 pounds. And I think I said this was wrapped in foil. It's not foil, it's a very heavy plastic thing. But I think if you can get your market to get these, get you a tenderloin like that, it's well worthwhile. And now, here we are, the whole tenderloin. This is the butt end, that's the tail end, and this center part is called the heart of the filet, or in French would be called le cœur, the heart of the tenderloin. If you're going to roast the tenderloin whole, you take off a little bit of this big butt end part, and you take the tail and fold it under. I'm going to take that off because we're going to take some of that off anyway, but you even it off so that you end up with a piece of meat that was just about even all the way around, and then it would be tied up. And a piece of the whole tenderloin like this would certainly serve 12 people. But we're going to cut it up. And I'm not going to cut it all up, but I'm going to cut off part of the tail, because I'm just going to serve 6 to 8 people. And then I'm going to cut off some of the butt end, but I'm going to leave that chain of meat attached on, because if you take it off, it seems to me you have awfully little meat. I think it's a very good thing to have your own tenderloin, whole one, and fool around with it, because then you know really what it consists of. And I think it's much cheaper if you do the trimming yourself. And then everything that you take off of it, you can use as steak or as sauté, or you can make brochettes out of it, and it's just delicious. I'm taking this little bit of skin off the top, which is always a little bit tough. As you see, if you are doing it yourself, you're not having to pay the butcher's time, and butchers are very expensive. Now we'll see how much this weighs. Well, that weighs about 3.5 pounds. That's enough for 8 people. And this one should weigh about 1.5 pounds. And all that is just delicious meat. And now, how to cook the meat, because a tenderloin, although it's the most expensive, has the least flavor because it's an inside muscle that doesn't get any exercise. So you have to give it flavor either by braising it or cover roasting it with aromatic vegetables, or you would marinate it. And I'm going to marinate it because that will give it some delicious flavor. And I'm going to have 1 can of truffles. See, we're just going the whole hog. You know what truffles are, these wonderful little dark, pungent things. And about 2 tablespoons of chopped shallots or scallions. And I always like a little tiny bit of garlic in. This is optional, but just a little tiny bit, it seems to me, gives a very nice flavor. But that's entirely up to you and how you feel about it. And then we want some cognac, and this has to be the real thing. This is a 1 ounce truffle, can of truffle, so I'm going to put in 2 truffle cans worth of cognac. That's about, a little bit more than 1/4 of a cup. And then a little white wine, or dry white French vermouth, and I'm going to put in some French vermouth, and it'll be about 2/3 to 3/4 of a cup of vermouth, or very good white wine. And about 2 tablespoons of oil, very light, fine French oil, because that carries the flavor of the marinade. And then we want a teaspoon of salt, and some pepper. I'm going to put in peppercorns, about 6 peppercorns, exactly 6, and 1 bay leaf, and about 1/4 teaspoon of thyme. And then stir it all up. And that truffle, and it's the juice from the can, it's marvelous. And that could have had a bigger pot than this. But that's what we'll have to marinate it a little bit longer, just marinate one end and then marinate the other. But actually it should be a pot that's big enough to hold it. And marinate it for at least 3 hours, but 12 hours or overnight would be better. Then after it's marinated, you have to dry it off. We'll pretend that this is marinated for 2 days, both the tail end and the butt end. Then you dry it off, because you have to dry it or you're not going to get it to brown. So dry it very, very, very thoroughly. And then also to protect it, because you've taken off most of the fat, get some strips of either beef suet or of fresh pork fat. These are little bits of pork fat taken from a loin roast. If you can get sheets of pork fat, that's all the better. But put them on the top and on the bottom, all around if you can, and then tie it up. I have one ready tied, which I shall bring out. See there, that's all tied with the pork fat tied on it, and you want to tie it in place to hold the chain of meat on, and also to hold the fat on. And now, this you want for the cooking of it. Say that it's all ready to roast, you've got it tied and everything. You can keep it in the refrigerator. And then an hour before you're going to roast, at least, you want to put it into the oven, and it's going to roast only about 35 to 40 to 45 minutes. And it's not how much it weighs, it's the circumference of it. And no matter how long a piece it is, it'll take just about the same time. And so this goes into a preheated 400-degree oven in about the middle or lower middle. And then turn it and baste it several times, and then have a little meat thermometer. And as soon as it's done, take it out. And if you're not ready to serve it, just take it out, turn off the oven, leave it open, leave the meat out for about 10 or 15 minutes to let the oven cool off completely. And then close the oven, turn it on to 120 degrees and put the meat back in. Or if you don't have a good thermometer, turn the oven on and off, but you're perfectly all right as long as the oven doesn't go over about 120, and your meat should be about 125 when it's done. And then take it out onto a carving board and let it sit. It should sit for about 10 or 15 minutes before you carve it. And then you have roasting juices in the pan. And you have to get the fat off. This I had done a little bit ahead of time, and it is sat. And so it is nicely ready to go. Now you want to deglaze your roasting juices. This was the marinade. So you put this in your roasting pan to deglaze it, meaning to get up all the little brown bits. Heavens. And then pour that into a saucepan. And you want to let that boil down. So let it boil down hard until all those juices have reduced practically to a glaze. You see how little there is there, but that is to boil it down and to get all the flavor out of the marinade and the roasting. And then you have yourself a lovely brown sauce. We've done so many of them that I'm not doing another one. I'm just showing you what you do. And then you have the truffles from your marinade chopped up, and then put in a little bit of Madeira wine. I'm going to let you put in a little bit more than that. And now while that's boiling down, we shall get to the carving of the beef. Now that beef was roasted in a 400-degree oven, and it was roasted only about 40 minutes, or to a meat temperature reading of 125 to 130, depending on how rare you like it. Then this looks rather naked, but it's going to have sauce on it. So you take off the protective layer of fat. I think this is going to be just right. I think it's a very good idea to feel meat with your finger to see how it is. If you're pressing the meat with your finger, when it's raw, it's squashy, and as soon as it is rare, it begins to firm just a little bit. Now there that is, beautifully pink. And I like to carve in very rather thick slices. These are about 3/4 of an inch thick. So it's really just like a steak. You have your hot platter. You'll see how my sauce is doing now. That's all right. Now, whatever vegetable garnish you have chosen, I have braised celery here. Braised celery is not a French type of garnish because they don't have our type of celery. So they hardly use it. They have rather green, harsh celery. So that you won't find braised celery in any of their classical garnitures. Tant pis pour eux, is the way I look at it. Now I have green beans. You see, you would arrange this beef now between courses. I mean, after you've cleared things out of from your first course, then you have all of your vegetables ready. And if you do the beans in the French way, you can very quickly toss them in butter and heat them up. And nobody minds waiting a few minutes if they know they're going to get an absolutely marvelous meal like this. Because where you're going to find really lovely, fresh vegetables like this, not very often. I'm going to put a few baked cherry tomatoes around there. That's another thing that Escoffier never had. Now we have our sauce. I'm going to put a little bit of this sauce with the truffles on the celery, not on the meat, and then pass the rest of the celery in a warmed sauce bowl. And that, just the smell of those truffles is absolutely marvelous. So I think you don't want to pretend that there isn't any kitchen. Now how long that didn't take very long to do the carving that and the arranging the vegetables. I'm giving you a run through, a kind of dry run of our dinner party. And for one thing, I wanted you to see how to pour the wine in case you haven't done it much before. There it is lying in its basket. And you usually pour from the right. And you fill the glass not more than half full, the tulip glass, and you rotate the bottle as you lift it up. And this is so that the last drop will roll around the neck of the bottle and not fall onto the cloth. You may want to pour the wine standing up, which is perfectly all right. Rotate the bottle toward you, then gently pour the wine in, and then rotate the bottle and gently turn it up. What you want to do with the wine is remembering that there may be some sediment in it. You just are handling it as gently as possible. You don't want to do a fast jerk, which would make the wine slop back into the bottle again and roil up the sediment. So the whole point is very, very gently all the time. Now this is really, I think, this is a beautiful picture. The French always consider cooking and dining, or gastronomy, one of the great civilized arts. And a filet de bœuf rôti sauce Périgueux means civilization, I'll eat it. So that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
The French Chef has been made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation. Julia Child is co-author of Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volumes 1 and 2.